More Things That Aren't There Anymore is made possible by a grant from Core States. You know us, we know you.
A city is made up of bricks, steel, and mortar. But what makes a city a community? In the Delaware Valley, it's the places and people whose special style and character have created a rich store of memories for generations.
Hello there, I'm John Facenda.
Join us as we spin some tales of those places and people who have done so much to shape the Delaware Valley we know today. Once upon a time, a Gothic castle graced the middle of Market Street in the shadow of City Hall. It was the realm not of kings and queens, but of American royalty, known as the Pennsylvania Railroad. Day after day, giant steam trains brought thousands of passengers through its portals into the center of town. They called this castle Broad Street Station. Actually, Broad Street Station was two different structures combined to form one grand terminal. The first building dated to 1882, designed by the Wilson brothers, architects of the famous Centennial Exposition of 1876. It was a station designed in the European style. Within a few years, it became taxed beyond its capacity, and as the railroad planned an expansion, it turned to the master of the Philadelphia style.
They hired Frank Furness, who is now a very famous Philadelphia architect. After many years of eclipse, he was commissioned to design the building in red brick and terracotta. So they built a 10-story building. So they had a 4-story building, built a 10-story building. And there are wonderful photographs of that building. I think it was one of the greatest Victorian masterpieces I've ever seen personally. It stood for 70 years, in that condition from 1893 to 1952.
The number of tracks coming into Broad Street Station expanded to 16, which required an enormous shed to cover them. The design was determined by utility and competition.
And so they went ahead and built this huge train shed, and one of the things that they made a point to do was to top the Reading. The idea of the Reading Railroad doing anything bigger or on a grander scale than the Pennsylvania was absolutely unthinkable. The train shed of the Reading is, I believe, about 300 feet even. And Pennsylvania made it a point, therefore, to do a train shed which was 306 feet wide, topping the Reading by 6 feet. And so the world learned that the Pennsylvania was indeed the Colossus. And when you would go into this train shed, it was an overwhelming sight to see this huge vault over all of these engines that were puffing away. And remember, this was the day of the choo-choo. There was no electric train yet. There was nothing in the way of diesel. This was all good old-fashioned coal. While they had skylights and ventilators and whatnot, the place was just coal dust incorporated. So you went in and you saw this scene of all of these trains puffing away, and then the coal dust which would get in your ears and in your eyes a little bit. And it was quite an experience to go along and to see this thing.
By 1910, 578 trains entered and exited Broad Street Station every day. making it the most desirable destination of the train riding public, not only for transportation, but for socializing. One such spot was the Savarin Restaurant.
The Savarin Restaurant was always a mecca for business luncheons. And again, it was so well located. It was right across the street from City Hall and near most of the main office buildings at the time. And people would make dates to have lunch and talk business, and also if you wanted to butter somebody up and show them that you held them in particular high regard, you took them to lunch at the Savarin.
Chuck has done what I think is the ultimate tribute to Broad Street Station, and that's this fantastic model. In fact, it's so fantastic, I can't even believe it.
Well, it's a little project that I got involved in.
Yeah.
My parents go to church with a friend named Harry Albrecht, and he had a little book on Broad Street Station. My brother's in a train. I said, boy, this would be great to make an N scale. And without thinking about where it was going to go, I started building, and that was about 7 years ago.
Oh my God, a labor of love.
There was a small part that I did build last night, the land bridge, which we go across the street, and I spent probably 30 hours working on
That's kind of fun.
on the little land bridge, and that's just a small piece about 7.5 inches long by about 3 inches. And there were no plans, so I had to draw all the plans myself from photographs. It's still being built. There's always little details to add and update as photographs give you more information, but this will probably continue being built for years to come.
Broad Street Station's grand train shed was indeed impressive, but it was also a fire waiting to happen. The shed's grease and oil-soaked wood flooring, the storage rooms beneath the tracks, and the cavernous space created by the vaulted roof combined to create a firefighter's nightmare. On June 10, 1923, that nightmare became a reality. At 11 p.m., the floor began to smolder, and by the time the fire department arrived, the shed was engulfed in flames. 200 passengers in a Boston-bound train were trapped inside smoke-filled compartments until a conductor commandeered an engine, drove it into the shed, and pulled the crippled cars to safety. Flames leapt to the top of the roof, and sparks from the inferno threatened the girders of the Fox building, which was under construction across Market Street. Miraculously, no lives were lost in this epic blaze, which until that time was the largest in Center City's history. When it was all over, the train shed was destroyed, never to be rebuilt. But the terminal was back in full operation 9 days later. Broad Street Station had other disadvantages. It was a stub-end station, which meant the trains had to back out for over a mile to rejoin the trunk lines past the Schuylkill and on to other destinations. All of this was accomplished by way of a 20-foot high trestle that came to be known as the Chinese Wall. Underground tunnels were not practical in the days of steam, but a mile-long stone wall in the middle of town tends to be a little obtrusive.
It was a disaster. Under the archways, there were 48 archways on this viaduct. The proper Chinese wall was something like 2,000 feet in length. But the thing I remember most of all was under every one of those archways where there was traffic, it dripped constantly. It dripped water. It was very, very, yeah. But I don't know enough about what it did to the commerce of the city. It must have really slowed things down.
And some of them were like 50-foot arches. And naturally, like any tunnel-like effect, it would kind of sweat under there and drip. I think that that wall, properly sandblasted and so forth, with its decorative sculpture, which it originally had, yes, it was forbidding in its way, but it kind of made a statement on its own.
Another major fire struck Broad Street Station in 1943. That, combined with the other disadvantages of the place, plus a desire to purge Center City of its Victorian quaintness, sealed the station's fate. City fathers decided to replace the station and its Chinese wall with a modern office complex to be called Penn Center. The last train to use Broad Street Station pulled out of the terminal and crossed the Chinese wall to 30th Street on April 27, 1952, to the strains of a melancholy serenade.
I covered the last train out of Broad Street Station, which went out at 8 o'clock at night and had 3 or 4 coaches on it, all VIP type coaches. It was not the regular commuter run to New York or from New York or whatever. It was a really Tony affair featuring no less than Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra. There were actually about 4 or 5 people in the orchestra who were told off to get up on the thing and to look real official and to raise their instruments whichever way they had to and to play. And the maestro then led the rendition, and everybody sobbed a little bit about the station being closed. But one of the great lies has always been that they played their way out of Broad Street Station. There is no way you could have gotten enough musicians on that back platform to make a legitimate sound.
Demolition of the station and the Chinese Wall began the next day. Penn Center has become a model of modern downtown renewal, but at the cost of a vital link to the city's past.
But the point is, the railroad station, the grand terminals of the cities, really, in a sense, were the modern cathedrals. I mean, or they were the modern temples. They would be to a city what, let's say, the triumphal arches were to Rome, or the Acropolis was to Greece. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, really. It was a temple of transportation.
Sun, sand, and surf. Atlantic City had it all, plus a collection of the finest seaside hotels on the East Coast: the Chalfont Haddon Hall, the Dennis, the Claridge, and the Shelburne. 2 of the grandest stood side by side, the Traymore and the Marlborough Blenheim. The Marlborough was the older wing of the hotel, predating the turn of the century. The new wing, the Blenheim, was added in 1903 and 1904, with none other than Thomas Edison contributing to the design and the lighting system. The distinctive look was a mixture of Moorish and Romanesque styles, resulting in opulence fit for an Oriental potentate.
The lobby and all the public rooms were designed on a grand scale. In those days, people came to Atlantic City and spent the summer here. Those were the days before air conditioning and swimming pools, and people who lived in Philadelphia and in New York that had the wherewithal got out of the cities. They just could not exist in the cities. Consequently, well-to-do families came here for the summer. They would come with steamer trunks and usually their key help. And those lobbies became grand living rooms. And one of the things I remember about the Marlborough Blenheim was one of the times that I was home from school and it was snowing. It had started, I guess it was close to the Christmas holidays, and it had started to snow, and we went up to the boardwalk, and I remember there was a bridge that connected the 2 hotels. In the bridge, there was a string quartet that would play every night from 7 o'clock on, and they would always play Mozart or Haydn or typical things that string quartets do. It was so appropriate, especially with the music in the background and the snowfall. It was an incredible scene. It's one I'll never forget.
Atlantic City, with its elegant hotels, fun-filled boardwalk, and beautiful beach, was the resort destination of the early 20th century. During the Second World War, the town and its hotels took on a new role, that of a giant army post by the sea. Fred Earhart was one of those soldiers who came to town for basic training. He came back after the war, got married, and today runs the Atlantic County Historical Society with his wife Betty.
And so here, came to Atlantic City as a raw recruit for basic training. We arrived by troop train. Train thunders into this big station, the Union Station, and we all get out and line up and march. We were just raw recruits. We didn't know how to march. And we marched straight down to the boardwalk. And they cheered us. Here we were, you know, nothing but recruits. Marched up the boardwalk. We didn't know what hotel we were going to. And people cheering on both sides. You'd think we'd just come back from winning the war. And marched into the Tremor, and then we were assigned to rooms. And at first it was 5 men to a room, 3 cots and 2 hotel twin beds. And we had a bathroom to ourselves, you know, as part of a room. That was unusual. You didn't have to go down the hall. Great living. And there was, you know, a burlesque for reveille, practicing marching in the Tremor parking lot in the street end of Illinois Avenue. We even later on did some marching on the beach and on the boardwalk. Of course, being a dancing fool, I remembered that there was the big USO dance at the Atlantic City High School, and they did have a big gym. And so we got in there late, and I spotted this young lady on my left here dancing, and she seemed to be a good dancer, and I was always kind of picky, you know. I didn't want a girl who would step on my feet because I was a good dancer. So finally went over after the dance, and that's how we met.
As did many other folks in Atlantic City in basic training days.
The submarine room was down on the ground floor, and there was a rotunda in front of it, and that's where our day room was. And the double door entrance into the submarine room was all boarded plywood all across. We didn't know what was in there. We would ask. Somebody told me that some of the guys had found a way to get into that area back there. Uh-oh. And they found the wine cellar.
Oh, dear.
Betty and I danced there. It was a nightclub type with a bar lounge along one side and several terraces, you know.
It was a handsome room. As I remember, it was black and white marble.
But it was a big secret as to what was behind that wall.
As the war progressed and wounded soldiers were brought to town for treatment, the hotels added a new dimension to their Army service.
No matter what hotel you were in, if you had to go on sick call, you went up to Haddon Hall. And then, I don't know exactly when, it became a general hospital, the England General Hospital. They had 3 beautiful small meeting rooms way up in the tower on the 14th floor, which were taken over as operating rooms. Of course, they had good elevator service. And after the war, those 3 meeting rooms were the first air-conditioned meeting rooms in Atlantic City, thanks to the Army.
But there were many, you'd see many soldiers on the boardwalk, amputees, whatever. They were here for their surgery, perhaps, and then a rest period before they were sent home or back to service, whatever they did. So we were very aware, those of us here were very aware of the special part those people played in the war.
Following the war, Atlantic City's hotels started to show signs of age, and the city lost its preeminence as a vacation hotspot.
All through the early 60s, the city started suffering a lot more. It became a lot more evident. It was starting to, the splinters were starting to show. The hotels were becoming more tattered. More of them were going into receivership. And so I can remember this Democratic convention was touted for at least a couple years before it actually happened, and that was considered at the time to be the big rebirth of Atlantic City. They felt that with all of the national and international coverage that convention would get, that people would finally get a chance to see Atlantic City and say, wow, let's go visit. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way because people had a sense that the city was already too crowded, so a lot of people who might normally have come there that summer made plans to go at other places. So the hotels really were vacant a good part of the summer, even before the convention started. The city started to slide, I think, at a faster rate after that.
In 1976, a statewide referendum approved casino gambling in Atlantic City, paving the way for a different kind of resort and a different kind of hotel. The new Atlantic City has literally risen from the ashes of the old. You say you didn't have the time or the resources to frolic in the surf at Atlantic City? In the old days, a perfect alternative was the banks of the Delaware in Pennsville, New Jersey, home of Riverview Beach Park. And back then, getting there really was half the fun.
I remember when I was just a kid, my mother used to take my two brothers and myself, and she would pack a picnic lunch and we would go on the Wilson Line boat. One of the things I remember doing is sometime during the trip we would go down to the next deck where they had a huge dance floor. And of course we were all too young to enjoy the dancing, but we would watch the older people dancing, and sometimes they would have an orchestra on there. Sometimes it would just be, I don't know, whether it was a radio or some kind of music, but we enjoyed watching that too.
The boat rides on the Wilson Line were very, very popular. Tremendous crowds came down from Philadelphia to visit the park. And the boats had a schedule of about 3 trips daily from Philadelphia. And then they would come down, and the people who came on the first boat usually would go back on the 5 o'clock boat to Philadelphia. But the park became so popular that I can remember at one time so many people came down to the park on the boats, and the park was so nice that they stayed. And when the last boat left Riverview Beach in the early evening at 7 o'clock, so many people stayed behind that they could not get on the boat, and the Wilson Line had to send buses down from Philadelphia to pick up the people.
As passengers alighted from the ferry, they were greeted by 30 acres of thrills, chills, and excitement, much of which had an aquatic theme.
We had one of the nicer swimming pools in the United States at that time. It was 50 yards long, 25 yards wide, and I think it was about 16 feet deep. And the capacity there, we had lockers where you could lock up your stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. As fast as someone would get out of the water, go in and get dressed and hand in their key, the kid would run the key down the front and sell it again. So they had tremendous crowds. It took as many as 7, 8, 9 lifeguards just to keep things safe.
At that time, this was a beautiful beach in front of the park where people came to enjoy a day of swimming in the river, which was really clean then, and on picnic days it would be really, really crowded. They had the beach in front of the park all the way up past the main part of Pennsville, and the sand was beautiful. It was really a beautiful beach at that time, and the people really enjoyed it.
The lake had bulkhead all the way around it, a wood bulkhead. Everything was completely enclosed, and it was nice to go out in the boats, but the guy who was in charge of the boats spent most of his time hiring somebody to go out and rescue people who were in the boats, because they'd get out there and they'd start fooling around and they'd lose their oars, and next thing you know, they're stuck out there without any paddles. It was nice for couples too, because they could get out there where it was quiet.
Yeah, I had the 2 coasters, the Hummingbird and the Wildcat.
Largest merry-go-round in the world.
Yeah, it was made in Germany.
There were 4 of them, but this was all hand-carved, beautiful. I would say today probably one of the horses is worth $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, not hundreds.
I know that Sally Starr came. I believe that they built Frontierland just to as a showcase for her, and she was very popular around here. We used to live in Pennsgrove, and we would come on the bus and come to Pennsville and come into the park and just walk around. Even when we didn't have money for the rides, it was a nice thing to do in the evening. It was a romantic thing to do because you might meet your boyfriend here and walk around hand in hand, and that was really a nice time of your life. I think that's why the park had so many wonderful fond memories for most people around here, and also in Philadelphia and Wilmington and places like that, because it was a part of our youth and a part of those really good memories that we had.
Another favorite attraction was the Riverview Beach Park Railroad. It was a child-sized train that rode a trestle over the park lagoon through a deliciously dark tunnel to the far edges of the property. Today, years after the park closed, there's a place in rural Pennsville where you can still savor the fun of the Riverview Beach Railroad, thanks to a man who loves trains.
So when I moved down here, got this farm, I said, this farm needs a railroad. What else is a farm for? Doesn't every boy of 45 want a train in his backyard? We bought the train home in '69. And we haven't laid a lot of track, but we've had an awful lot of fun laying what we have. We have found that more people than myself love this little train. I had friends that said they loved to go ride on it. An old man told me he used to go and ride again and again. He rode all afternoon to ride that old train around just to love to ride it. Another man said when he was a boy he tried to wreck it. My neighbor up the street, Bill Culp, said he courted his wife on this train. The track that you see is from Riverview Beach Park. The trucks and the frames on all the cars that we'll see today are built on the chassis of the park cars. This engine, of course, was not. We've been down here working, and we'll see a pickup truck or a station wagon full of kids stop and look and go very slowly past the farm. And I always wave, come on. So while they pull in and come down to the fence and we give them a ride, they're delighted to know that they're welcome. And that's the way I want it. Let me show you this gas engine. This is the one that is really the workhorse of our railroad. Back in the days before they had rubber-tired front-end loaders, this engine worked at the Trenton, New Jersey sewage plant, hauling sludge from the plant out to the fields. And it's a gasoline-operated engine. It has a 6-cylinder Hercules JX7 motor. It's a friction drive engine, and it runs like a snapper mower. It starts nicely, it runs nicely, and it'll pull a full train full of cars with the children in it. And I think we ought to give you a ride right about now.
All set?
In 1976, the people of Pennsville reclaimed Riverview Beach as a civic park. And as people enjoy the greenery at the edge of the river, veteran park goers are transported back to an earlier time.
I've heard people say that they can't come to the park without, they'll hear the music from the roller coaster or the carousel, or they'll hear the music from the swimming pool, or they'll hear the organ from the skating rink. And a lot of people get on that nostalgia kick.
They used to say that Philadelphia rolled up the sidewalks at night. It was never really true, especially when the Latin Casino was in town, on Walnut Street, just east of Broad, currently the site of the Holiday Inn. From the 1940s to 1960, the biggest names in show business brought their acts to the small basement club run by Dallas Gerson and Dave Duchamp.
It was a building of about 1 story only, and a black tile front. And when you entered the Latin Casino, you went down into a basement area. The club was a subway club. It seated, I guess, maybe about 400, 450 people. And the stage sat back up against as you came into the dining room on the left wall. And the seats arranged around it, of course, in sort of a semicircular vein. And it was a delightful little club, a great intimate spot to work in. Those people who are familiar with the name Joey Bishop know that he became a big motion picture star, and now he was booked into the Latin Casino. This is his hometown. And as you recall, I told you the front of the Latin Casino was black tile, and they used to put the name of the star out front in whitewash. I said, ladies and gentlemen, Philadelphia's own Joey Bishop. And he walked out to a tremendous ovation. And finally, he said, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know what a thrill it is for me to be here in my own hometown, starring in the #1 nightclub, and see my name out front in Bonami. Tony Bennett was a big, big star even back in those days. He had a number of big hit records. And Tony was doing a new song, a great song called Lost in the Stars. One portion of the song he sings, and sometimes I think maybe God's gone away, forgetting his promise and word he'd say, and I'm lost out here in the stars. And Tony was such an emotional singer to begin with. So after the rehearsal, I said, you know, Tony, it'll be so dramatic if at that point, you know, and sometimes I think maybe God's gone away, and you'd start to cry. He said, gee, that's great. He said, but how do you cry? And I had just finished studying theater arts at UCLA, and I said, well, they taught us, you know, the Stanislavski method is you think of the saddest thing that's ever happened to you. God forbid a relative has passed away or you lost a favorite pet, and that'll make you cry. And so opening night, introduced Tony, he came out, he did a show, and he did this new song, Lost in the Stars, and he got to that point. Sometimes I think maybe God's gone away, forgetting his promise, and his tears are rolling down his cheeks. And the audience, you could hear audible sobbing. And he finished the song to a monstrous standing ovation. The reviewer for the Inquirer, he had interviewed Tony after the show, and he said, you know, it was so magnificent, Mr. Bennett, that you cried when you know, how did you do that? And he said, well, we used the Stanislavski method. So when I saw Tony, I said, you Stanislavski? When did you study Stanislavski? I told you. He said, Bob, how's it going to look in the paper? The MC taught me how to cry. I said, okay, buddy. That's why if you see on the picture, he's written, thanks for your wonderful ideas.
The Latin Casino became such a fixture that visiting performers made friends with local merchants, like Sidney Laval. He's currently a stockbroker, but was the former co-owner of the Sidney Arnold Men's Store and became known as Tailor to the Stars.
Entertainers, when they have a late show at a nightclub like the Latin Casino, they usually sleep late, and then they have a lot of off time. So they would browse around town. But looking across the street at that time and upstairs, and it said Sidney Arnold Clothiers, they came up, and that's how we got to know them. Buddy Greco and Mel Torme equally were great boosters of our store. They made jingles about the store.
Summertime and the living is easy. Well, it may be easy, but it also can get pretty warm. And the best way to beat the heat is to visit Sidney Arnold at 1310 Walnut Street, so you can see.
When you went to the Latin Casino, you made a reservation. And that reservation was as good, or your place at a table where the table was placed was as good as the tip to the maitre d'. Now the story goes, and God rest his soul, he was a great man. This maitre d' was so talented that when you slipped him a tip of a folded bill, he could palm it and know whether it was a 1, a 5, a 10, or a $20 bill. Now the funny thing is, when you went into the Latin Casino, all the tables were filled and it was jammed. I'll use the name Max. His name was not Max. So when you slipped Max a tip and there was no tables left, a snap of a finger, a table appeared. a 18-inch diameter table, and they sat 12 people around it. It was practically on the stage, but that was part of what nightclub was in those days.
Philadelphia's restrictive blue laws kept nightclubs from serving drinks past midnight on Saturdays. That, combined with the site's small size and the lack of parking, prompted Dushoff and Gerson to move the nightclub across the river to Cherry Hill.
The site was a perfect site. It was a perfect site because there was nothing near it. And it opened up with, as I said, Holiday in Japan, and that was a guy by the name of Parker, who was Shirley MacLaine's husband. And then we almost got shut down because the Japanese girls came out with bare breasts. And the mayor got all uptight, and so did everybody else, so we made them put bras on, you know, for coming into the second show. David booked an act called George Carlin and Frankie Avalon on one bill. And we threw a party for Frankie Avalon, his 21st birthday party, and he said it was the first drink he ever had. But at that same time, I heard of a guy that was playing piano in New York in the hotels by the name of Liberace. Dave says, I'll give you 30 to 1 that your act dies or my act does all the business. The wind-up is Liberace brought all the old ladies out from under the rocks. This is a crazy true story. And Frankie Avalon and the comic did a fair business. So you have to be lucky in this business without knowing. Who the hell ever heard of Liberace? Nobody at that time.
The nightclub thrived in Cherry Hill through the 60s and 70s as a parade of stars continued to appear on its stage. But after 4 decades of showbiz, the Latin Casino closed its doors for good in 1981. Common wisdom has it that the Atlantic City casinos led to its demise, but Marty Rahm begs to differ.
And when Dave died, I went out. I had no interest in the place whatsoever because I was there because we had a deep friendship for one another, and I left the place. Dallas was going to operate the nightclub, and he had a son, Charles, that was going to help him. And needless to say that the place went down, and Charles came to his father and said, let's change it to a disco called Emerald City. They invented a name. And Dallas called me and told me what he's going to do, and I said, I think you're crazy. I said, disco's on its way out. And sure enough, it died. It truly died. Bulldozers went in, and everything went down. There was nothing left when they bulldozed that place.
That's the one, so unforgettable. Thinks that I am unforgettable too.
Long before Camden, long before Baltimore, even long before SeaWorld, whales and dolphins frolicked on Broad Street in South Philadelphia. It was the Delaware Valley's own theater of the sea, the Aquarama.
Now, for years, my family, particularly my father, had worked with George Hammett at Steel Pier. And I find out that George Jr. had purchased, or at least the lease to operate, a place called Aquarama in Philadelphia. And knowing show business, he asked me once during that summer of '65, Gene, would you go up there and tell me what you see and what you think? He offered me the princely sum of $8,000, and I fainted and I said yes, and I took over here. We had a 50,000-gallon in-ground saltwater pool for our whales. The wall itself was about chest high, but it went down 15 feet into the water. In the area in front along Broad Street, we had large cave structures to give some form out here, and inside were dioramas, again a $200 word to indicate fish displays. And as you know, fish swim at different levels depending upon their needs in the ocean. So a community tank meant that, a community of different level fish. But also, to make that more viable, we'd have scuba divers in there and deep sea divers. And then we went into a thing called the Theater of the Sea. Dark theater, and a long rectangular tank, about 100 feet long, 25 feet wide, glass from water level to the floor, and then plastic panes to keep the water from splashing and the dolphins in. There were raked rows of seats on both sides rectangularly, so that if you were on the top, you were above the plastic. If you were on the bottom row, you were at the bottom of the tank, which made everything that occurred in there visual. And each time we would ask our dolphins to see how high they could jump, and we'd have lights in effect. And one of the standard music themes for the show was With the Girls in the Water, the theme from Gone with the Wind. You're all aware now of dolphins who are able to beach themselves. Well, in order to make something of that, I devised the idea that we'd bring a youngster in from the audience, usually a school kid 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Now remember, he's dressed coming from school. When I count 3, 1, 2, 3, you dive into the pool, grab a hold of the dolphins who will race around the pool twice, carry you through the rings and bring you back to the stage. Well, as soon as I say dive into the pool, you know, he'd start getting the look of terror in his face. And then we would go to the bit where I'd say, since you won't go in to see the dolphins, Sonny Hill, who was our trainer, will bring the dolphins up to you, and the dolphin would beach, and of course that would get a big roar. So one day I have John. John, I don't know if you're watching this program, but if you are, you'll remember this. I said, and I tell him this, when I count 3, you're going to dive into the pool, and I'm looking for the look of terror. I say, you ready? 1, 2, and as I say 3, he dives into the pool, clothes and all, and I'm stunned, and the trainer's laughing, and the girl in the water's laughing, and I said, oh my goodness, you know, and we're flustered, and we get him out, and he's dripping wet. Now, you might suspect today of our society there have been 9 suits and 8 arrests. Later on, the mother came over and we got towels around this kid. She says, that's just like John.
Despite the best efforts of the staff, the Aquarama was not making a splash. So they turned to the world of television to provide much-needed publicity and pizzazz.
We were very successful with the Steel Pier television show with kids dancing and relief shots of yachts and boats sailing by on a very hot weekend afternoon. And George Hammond thought it would be a pretty good idea to try it from the aquarium. And for relief shots, piranhas and sharks floating by with the top name acts and the kids dancing. On one show we had Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross and the Supremes, and the Four Tops. And we continued to have that kind of talent gracing our Aquarama every Saturday afternoon. We had the top acts in showbiz who, when they stopped off in Philadelphia, had to make this show, and because we had such very good ratings. Before the first show, they put an old-time bathing suit on me that didn't exactly fit properly. And as I jumped into the pool to ride the dorsal fin of the dolphin, the bathing suit fell down to my ankles. I never did see the finished product. I think they did away with it.
It was a lovely facility. Whatever financial reasons that it didn't make it, it may be the wrong time, the wrong place. But I thought one of the factors, if you can see down here in South Philadelphia now, even with all the activity of the stadiums and the like, there's no foot traffic. So nobody happened to walk by this facility. If you didn't have directions from downtown, you couldn't find it. There was no subway stop down at this end here, except at Snyder. So unless you came by bus or you knew by car, it was sort of a disappearing facility. But is that a bad phrase to finish up with? That's life.
The Continental Watch Company of New York, makers of the famous 20th century, the watch that's as new as tomorrow.
The time was the 1930s, and in homes across the Delaware Valley, listeners first heard a voice that was to dominate the airwaves for the next 50 years, first on radio, then on television. It was a voice that combined velvet smoothness with commanding authority. The voice of a man whose simple introduction became the most trusted greeting in broadcasting.
Hello there, I'm John Facenda.
Most people assume that John Facenda was a native Philadelphian. Actually, he was born in Virginia and moved here with his family in the 1920s when his father found work building the Ben Franklin Bridge. He attended Roman Catholic High School and Villanova University, aspiring to a career in engineering. But when a head cold, suffered by the college radio station sports announcer, thrust Facenda in front of the microphone, he never looked back.
The radio part of his career was the first part, and certainly I think in his own mind was in many ways the most important. It was what what he identified. He was a radio man, he was a broadcaster, he loved the feeling of a script. He became well known as the newsman of WIP, but in the early days he did everything that the early radio days did.
By the late 1940s, John Facenda was the king of local radio. But a new medium, television, was coming in, and that meant opportunity for a whole new kind of stardom. Channel 10 lured Facenda away from radio to anchor the nation's first 11 o'clock TV newscast, along with stalwarts like Ed McMahon, Phil Sheridan, Jack Whitaker, and occasionally me. It was there that he made his greatest impact and his best friends.
And he owned 11 o'clock on radio. This is before television, of course, 1946, because he had the most popular newscast at 11 o'clock. And it was almost a logical progression for someone, and in this case Charlie Vanda, who was the head of our station, to call John Facenda in when he wanted to do an 11 o'clock, because that was unheard of then, 11 o'clock at night. Who did news on television? Who had television at 11 o'clock?
Television signed off by 9 then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think it was just a natural thing for John to become the 11 o'clock newsman on television.
It's like amazing that the 11 o'clock news became an institutional thing for television for all over the world.
Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Facenda, along with his news team, dominated the television ratings, just as he had done earlier in radio. Facenda was so trusted that many viewers based their daily schedules on his.
I overheard conversations where a nice woman who has a home in the suburbs or in the city, they would make sure that John said, "Do have a nice night and a good day tomorrow." And John would pull his cufflink up a little bit. "Good night." And that's when that was their cue to get up, turn the television set off, and go to bed.
Do have a nice night and a good day tomorrow. Good night, all.
He was a word merchant. He loved words. He loved the meaning of words. He insisted on proper pronunciations. Someone escaped from prison. That person was not an escapee, he was an escapee. And John would insist on proper terms and words.
Let us now praise famous men. And their names were drawn in hopes that men of fame would stagger at the sight of them. And though such men have seldom come and scarcely ever staggered, new names are set upon the stone.
Facenda was in every sense a perfectionist, and as any Channel 10 staffer could tell you, working with a perfectionist could be daunting.
Let's call on Herb Clark. Is it a bright outlook, Herb?
I think for the most part, John, if something went wrong with the show, I think every producer, every writer, every stagehand and technician has come under fire from John, and you got charred.
I never incurred his wrath because when I came here, I had no broadcasting experience. I was a nurse, working at Bellevue in psychiatry in New York, and I was so horrible. I mean, I was so nervous. Tears would well up in my eyes, and sometimes I literally could not speak. John always called me Edith. And now we have this report from Edith. And I'd sit there, I remember on 2 occasions, I couldn't talk.
Edith, the runway with the girls, all yours.
He said, when you look at the camera, I want you to pretend that your 2 children are the only people at the other side of the camera. And talk to your children. That helped.
We'll be able to say, I saw the originals on the big news. John?
Thank you, Edith, and thank you, ladies.
One of my treasures, along with a lot of memories of John Facenda, is a recording that he did of the Nativity, the story of the Nativity from 2nd Luke in the New Testament. And John and Jack Whitaker and a couple of others financed this thing, did it privately, and it is a classic in diction and voice and great reading.
Stories abound of John Facenda's amazing generosity with his time and his resources.
He read for the blind for many years. He did charity work for Police Athletic League. Plus untold stories that people still relate of kindnesses he did to people who were, say, burned out in a fire or some local disaster or some local cause where a donation went.
One Sunday, Joe Daly was at St. Matthias Church with John. They walked out the door, and the priest there said, "Excuse me, John, do you know what time it is?" And he said, "Yes, it's 11 o'clock. And he said, "How come you don't know what time it is, Father?" He says, "Because I don't have a watch." He says, "Well, you have one now." He took the watch off, gives it to the priest, and walks away.
Yeah, that's so typical.
But that was John Facenda. That's exactly how we felt about everybody.
John Facenda spent an unprecedented 25 years anchoring the news at Channel 10. In 1973, when it was time to step down, he did so with his usual class and grace.
A quarter of a century is a hefty chunk of one's life, and I want you to know what your loyalty and your friendship have meant to me through those long years. And to you, my heartfelt gratitude for 25 happy and rewarding years. Be happy for me, because I am content.
Leaving the anchor desk meant the end of one career for John Facenda, but the expansion of another, with his role as the national voice of NFL films. Listen to the voice as it describes the violence, drama, even the poetry of the game of football.
Number 50, search and destroy. Number 58, search and destroy. This is the face of the tiger.
Beneath a giant birch tree, where Father Soren once sat smoking a peace pipe with the Indians, rest the bones of Newt Rockney. His spirit has yet to be buried. Do you fear the force of the wind, the slash of the rain? Go face them and fight them. Be savage again. The palms of your hands will thicken. The skin of your cheek will tan. You'll grow ragged and weary and wet, but you must do the best you can.
Facenda's unmistakable voice of doom style won him a place in the National Football League Hall of Fame. For all his vocal virtuosity, Facenda, like everyone else, was not immune to the occasional gap.
Let's take that over again.
This name is Hawkins, John.
An original Raider, Wayne Harkins. I got that wrong that time. Wayne Harkins. Shoot now, come on, John. And original Raider. Oh, no, wait a minute. And original Raider. No, I'm trying to figure out your damn writing.
Hawkins, John. Hawkins.
Wayne Harkins. Yeah, I had it then. Wayne Harkins. No, Wayne Harkins. You stupid.
John Facenda's career continued until 1984, when serious illness stilled his distinctive voice. He watched from a hospital bed as Bill Baldini accepted an Emmy Lifetime Achievement Award on his behalf.
And remember, John, have a nice night tonight and a good day tomorrow. Good night, John. We love and respect you. For you.
2 weeks later, John Facenda died at the age of 72.
You're never dead as long as there's someone alive who can speak well of you. If that saying is true, that certainly he'll be around for, excuse me, he'll be around for a long time.
Today, this ornate theater is called the Trocadero. They host rock bands. In the old days, they called it the Troc, and it specialized in something entirely different.
And then we would just walk out and we just like tease the audience or walk around the stage. And we would look at somebody and we'd just give them a seductive look.
People don't understand, I think, today when they talk about burlesque. They put a dirty connotation to it. It was indeed good, clean, dirty fun. But it wasn't the sleaze and the stuff that we have now that's available on stands and on corners. And it was a thoroughly innocuous thing where you got your kicks and you, like Rabelais, got it out of your system and you forgot about it. You could go to see a dancer such as Georgia Southern come out on the stage, and she would usually have, as most of the big timers did, opera-length gloves and a beautiful gown and rhinestone slippers, and she would start with the gloves, and she would begin to take one finger at a time. Now that sounds corny, but I'll tell you, you were ready to go out and bite tent stakes by the time she was finished with this thing and then moved into the serious business.
Take the gloves off, and then I would play to someone, like say, you, and I would throw my glove, you would try to grab it, and I'd grab it back. The art of stripping was a tease. Now you see it, now you don't. Seniors in high school, the young boys would cut class just to see the strippers. They were in awe of them because they had a special sophistication, but they were kind. I met many people in my life, but there's no kinder person than an exotic. They would help each other, they were compassionate. And, you know, that's where young men learned about sex, but in a nice way, not in a lewd way. It took me 8 years to become a good stripper. You know, you just don't go out there and take your clothes off. You have to know how to work your audience. You have to know how to command respect. You have to pick one person out of the whole audience and look at that person's eyes. And when you look at that person's eyes, everybody thinks you're looking at everyone. And respect is the most important thing. And then, by then, the second tune would come on, and say it was Sugar Blues. And Sugar Blues was more of a sexy number. And then you would move, then you'd throw that away. A feature in burlesque would not want to do comedy because it would take away from their image. So when I started, I studied acting with Roger Bowen in New York, and I had a flair for comedy, so I loved doing comedy. I don't know what the audience thought. They just thought, oh my God, here's these girls, they're nude, or they're half nude, and they come out and they go backstage. The comics weren't interested in us. All they were interested in was doing a good job.
One such comic is Ken Barry, still going strong today with his burlesque style act. He did his apprenticeship at the Troc and recently revisited his old haunts to reminisce.
And I got started 17 years of age. And I became a candy butcher selling candy and prize packages up and down the aisles. I could give you an example of a candy butcher who was a pitcher. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, once again. I see that you enjoyed the first half of our show and the most beautiful girls in the world, and you're going to enjoy the last part of our show more enthusiastically. You'll find a little gizmo that we have here, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like an ordinary eyedropper. However, it is not. If you will place this to your eye, you will see one of the most beautiful girls in the entire world. Now, that's only half of it. If you turn this little gizmo a little bit like that, you'll find that she disrobes, and that's not even half of it. Watch it as you turn it once more and hold it to the light. Gentlemen, you are going to see the best hoochie coochie dancer in all the world. Who'll be the first one? Thank you very much. Or only a quarter for the entire three, not for just one. Thank you very much. Anybody else? We only have a limited amount and a limited time. Men came in the theater of the Trocadero dressed with a jacket, mostly with a tie, shirt, pants. Men dressed like gentlemen. There was no dress code the way they have it today, my goodness. Comedy was clean. There were innuendos, making time with a girl or going out with a girl. Of course, they would do things like that, but basically, compared to what they do today, you could do our burlesque shows in front of the Pope. The famous comedians was Bert Lahr, Jimmy Savoy, Saxon Binder. Abbott and Costello did their routine in burlesque for many years. And they worked right here at the Trocadero Theater many, many times. And of course, the all-time favorite in our area, and many other areas, was Billy Hagan, Cheese and Crackers. He was a slim fella, just had old clothes on and suspenders. And anything you tell him to do, as soon as he said cheese and crackers, people would roar.
Maxie Furman was a baggy pants comic who ran the Troc in its later years. His specialty was dreaming up exotic names for the strippers who played there in the 60s and 70s.
Some of the exotic names that Maxie used to entice people to see these people at the Troc were Melba, the toast of the town; Penny Central, the commuter's delight; Cellophane, the see-through girl; Lisa Carr, she gives till it hurts; Anna Sin, Miss Painkiller of 1970; Libby Ration, she puts up a big front; and the never-to-be-forgotten Carlotta Tendon, you'll want to park here all night. And of course, take your vest off, the Cossack's delight.
Maxie Furman's comic imagination notwithstanding, the Troc fell on hard times in the 1970s, along with burlesque houses all over the country. Mainstream movies were becoming more daring than anything to be seen on the theater stages. On March 31st, 1978, the Troc rang down the curtain on the strippers and comics forever, ending nearly a century of naughty but nice entertainment.
There isn't a comic in the world, Bob Hope, George Burns, Danny Kaye when he was alive, Mickey Rooney today, that wouldn't and doesn't love to perform in costume and do a burlesque scene. They're so endeared to that art of show business that is close to our hearts. We just love the comics, we love the entertainment, we love the jokes, we love the scenes, and if we had a chance for nothing, we would perform it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the management, and before the rise of the curtain, I would like to call your attention to a very fine product.
In the 1960s, Georgie Woods not only played the hottest Motown hits on the radio, he also presented them in person at the Uptown Theater, Philadelphia's answer to the Apollo.
That's our theme song, Joyride. Now, you folks at home, I want you to picture yourself 30 years ago, and I'm on stage here, and I'd like to just tell you and show you what we did. And I'd come out where I'm standing right now. Hello, everybody. How y'all? The guy with the goods. We got a great show for you, one that we certainly hope that you will and know that you're going to enjoy. On our show today, we have with us Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, the Motown Review, Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson, and Little Stevie Wonder, all on one show. So enjoy. And here's our first act. And that's the way we did it. As I drive by the Uptown from time to time, theater, I look at it, and all of it, a flashback comes to me, where you see all of the great entertainers who appeared here on the stage, and all the fun and all the people who were in this theater. And on the air at WPGR, I play music there, and I play some of these stars who have appeared here, and it's just like a flashback. I can just picture them on this stage, performing just like the Isley Brothers. When they performed here, I recall the first time they came to this theater, and they were all up in the balcony. They were jumping all over the place, jumping out in the audience, dancing up with ropes up in the ceiling. It was just amazing. It was fantastic, Every show we ran for at least 10 days. We would do 5 shows a day on the weekends, 3, during the week, and 5 on the weekends and holidays, or sometimes 6. And you had such stars as Diana Ross, the Supremes, Aretha Franklin. They all work here. A typical show would be, you'd have 10 acts. I have 10 acts on the show. We'd get the Motown Review in here, which was a great draw. We'd introduce Little Stevie Wonder. I can see him now going over to the edge of the stage here, giving me almost a heart attack because I thought he was going to fall off the stage, and I'd rush out to grab him, And then he'd come up here and play the drums, and back then he played the harmonica. And he was the one who, I think, one of the most exciting acts that I've introduced here at this theater was Stevie Wonder. And, of course, Michael Jackson when he was a little guy. The Jackson 5, when they appeared here, before anyone knew who they were, we gave them their first job, you know, before they had a record out here at the Uptown. And then we had James Brown, who would, well, he was the hardest working person I've ever seen in the show business. He was he's the godfather. And he had a way of entertaining, he'd dance, and the thing that Michael does now, the moonwalk, James Brown did that here on the stage years ago. A lot of young people don't even believe it because they never believed that anyone would have a show where they go for 50 cents to see Diana Ross, the Supreme, Stevie Wonder, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, Marvin Gaye. They don't believe that. Because today, if you see one act for $25, you're lucky. Well, they called the Uptown the Royal, the Howard, the Regal in Chicago, and the Apollo was the Chitlin circuit. You know, that's where all of your acts had to play. And once you made this circuit, you were pretty well established because, you know, they left the Apollo, they came here, left here with the Washington, then they went on down to the Royal, you know, places like that. And those are the areas where we had the theater. Yeah, this was the answer. Whatever went on in New York, we had it here at the Uptown.
The advent of large auditoriums and the casino scene hurt smaller theaters like the Uptown during the 1970s. The early 80s saw an attempt to recapture past glory.
Well, I was trying to be a consultant to John Bowser, and he had a dream and a vision to bring back entertainment here. But I thought at the time, he also tried to have a nightclub and a restaurant upstairs and a place like that. And he couldn't give back the kind of shows that we gave with 10 top flight entertainers on one show. You just couldn't do that now because each entertainer in his own right would like to be the star of the show. And that was his dream, and that's what he wanted to do, and I think that's what caused him, to have so much of a heartache. And that broke his heart when it couldn't succeed. You would think it's a neighborhood theater, but it's not. It was a city theater. This place here was all of that and some. Then.
And I won't quit till I'm a star on Broad Street. On Broad Street.
Not long ago, these men removed this door from an abandoned television studio at 46 and Market Streets and put it on a plane bound for Hollywood, where it will join a collection of souvenirs from the hippest show ever to come from Philadelphia.
This is WFIL-TV, the Philadelphia Inquirer station.
Bandstand hit the airwaves in 1952 as a live local broadcast on WFIL-TV. For 4 years, it was hosted by local DJ Bob Horn. In 1956, personal problems forced Horn off the show, and the plum hosting job went to a younger WFIL disc jockey, Dick Clark.
They said, do you want the job? Well, my tongue was hanging to the floor. This is a show that got 67% of a rating. It was a huge success. And I walked in July of 1956 and changed my life. During the year that I had it, as a local show, I said, is there no way we can talk the ABC television network into putting this on? They had already sent a man down to look at it who'd written a memo saying, I don't know why, I don't understand it, but maybe you ought to try it. So that was August of, I want to pick the right date, I think August 7th of 1957, August 5th of 1957. We went on the air. 4 weeks later, the Bandstand, which had been rechristened American Bandstand, was the #1 television show in the daytime all across the country. I was 26 or 7 years of age, and I looked to be about 18 or 19 at the time. I was obviously a little older than they were. I knew a little more about what they were, and I've always liked young people. I've always been that way. all my life. I can't tell you how many thousand times people have said to me, I learned to dance by holding onto a door handle and pretending I had a partner. And so, yes, it taught a lot of people how to dance.
Bob the Grill 17.
I was telling this story to somebody last week who didn't live through the era. Those kids drew 15,000 pieces of mail a week. There were 30 or 40 of them that were regulars on the show, the committee, we called them. That was our insurance policy in case it rained or the elevator trains broke down. There'd always be somebody there to dance. They became immediate stars. They were on the front pages of teen magazines. They had their own fan clubs. People wrote to them, as I mentioned. They would go to a sock hop, a record dance in those days, and thousands of people would turn out to see them. It was an extraordinary phenomenon. In the Philadelphia era of the show, which was from 1952 to 1963, that would be 11 years, Tommy DeNoble was the biggest local star before the show went on the air. He went to a record dance once and literally 3,000 people showed up because Tommy DeNoble was going to be there.
The first record I recorded was right out of high school. It was a song called I Want to Go With You, written by Les Waz. But the one that really took off was a song, it was a redo of the old standard, Count Every Star.
Count every star in the midnight sky. Count every rose, every firefly. For that's how
And that's the one that was hitting when Dick Clark introduced me on the show. And I was pretty nervous about it, but he got me through. Well, you know, on the show, there were two styles of dancing that I can remember that were very prevalent. There was the South Philly style, which I adapted to. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I just liked the way it felt. And the North Philly style. North Philly had a more restrictive, straightforward style of dancing, but the South Philly style of dancing, slow dancing in particular, was in very close, and you hold the girl's hand up this high. You see, I mean, you would swoop around the floor. I mean, it was a sight to see.
Well, there were real people. Long before there was a television show called Real People or reality television, we had reality television on for almost 3 hours a day. It was just kids dancing the records. It'll never happen again.
By late 1963, the center of the television world was moving to the West Coast, and Clark, as a producer as well as a host, knew that he had to move with it.
Philadelphia was not then, nor is it now, one of the centers of world television. It was a music center, but I said, I'm in the television business. I have two choices. I can move to New York or go to Los Angeles. I didn't want to leave the Bandstand behind, and so I asked permission, could I take it with me? And the station said yes, provided it was provided to them and ABC and will fulfill the contract. So in the winter of 1963, we packed up the podium and some records, and in a U-Haul trailer, the Bandstand went to California, and we opened up shop in the spring of 1964. But nothing ever matched the impact Philadelphia had, because we were on 5 days a week, sometimes as much as 2 hours a day nationally. Everybody copied the music, the dances, and what the kids did in Philadelphia. I spent 12 years in Philadelphia. Everybody to this day assumes I was born here and was a native, except they don't listen to my accent, so they know I wasn't born in Philadelphia. It is my adopted hometown. The 12 most important years of my adult life were spent here. I made lifelong friends and never had friends in my life like I achieved in Philadelphia, because there's something very strange about this city. Strange in a good way. It has roots. People care for each other. You talk about the condition of the streets and the government. It's like a small town when it's a big city, but it has all of the wonderful attributes of a little town. And it was the last time I ever had neighbors, the last time I ever had any real friends outside of show business. So this city was awful nice to me.
That seems to be a common reaction of people who lived in this area, either briefly or for their entire lives. The city's been good to them. It's that small town feel in a big city setting. The feeling that you're living in a place with a heart and a soul, and just as importantly, a history. It's what makes the Delaware Valley unique, and what we've tried to capture in this show. This is Bill Campbell.
For years, Core Estates has served the very people we've grown up with. We're neighbors serving neighbors, helping them make the most of what they have. From investments and trusts to business banking needs. It's a philosophy about partnerships, a philosophy about trust. Words that mean something in this community. Core Estates.
You know us and we know you.